Proximity by Great 78. Chapter 6. Honesty. Still Wednesday, 4 August 2010. It wasn't every Wednesday evening that a witch skipped dessert to garb herself in her best lingerie and lie in wait for Draco in his bed. But, if he were being honest with himself, this wasn't at all where he'd seen the evening going when he invited Astoria Greengrass over for dinner tonight, for their second date. There had been a time in his life, bloody hell, not even that long ago, a few months back, in fact, that he would have felt both joyous and pressured to swan dive onto the bed and show the witch a good time. His hedonistic 20-something brain would have been relieved and excited to skip the formalities and niceties that most witches required to get to this point. The flowers, the drinks, the compliments, the lavish meals. 20-something Draco would have unzipped his trousers and fed his raging hard cock into her without even bothering to loosen his tie. But 30-year-old Draco simply stood there, his cock barely twitching, frozen in uncertainty. He watched the witch's small breasts rise and fall with her nervous breaths. Her legs shifted uncomfortably, and the pink ribbon that trailed over her clean-shaven cunt slipped to one side, revealing her entirely unaroused pussy to him. Astoria swallowed hard, her neck bobbing with the strain. I just thought maybe we should get on with it. After all, that's where this is going, right? You're looking for a wife, and I need to find an appropriate husband. We should just do this. Make sure we're compatible, right? A tear slipped down from the corner of her eye, dropping into the pink shell of her ear. Her twisting fingers at her waist did not reach to brush it away. Draco remained frozen to the spot, torn between ignoring the witch's words and pretending this was all perfectly normal, or just running away. Instead, his 30-year-old self girded his maturity and spoke. "Well, you seem to have all the requisite parts in order, and I've never had any complaints before, so I'd say we're probably compatible enough in that regard. But correct me if I'm wrong. I get the sense that you don't really want this, Tori." Tori's perfectly lovely face twisted as fresh tears fell harder now. She moved her hands to cover her breasts self-consciously. "No, it's fine." Draco fought his scoff. "Which, this is anything but fine. Forgive me for sounding crass, but I don't have a rape fetish. And if you do, I don't believe this is typically the way those scenarios begin." She sat up, her arms still crossed self-consciously in front of her. The tears that had fallen to the sides of her face now tracked down her cheeks. You don't want to have sex with me?" she asked hopefully. "Tori, Draco was practically dumbstruck to realize that he, in fact, did not wish to have sex with her. He knew he could have, easily, if this had been an ordinary date, and the witch had seemed even halfway willing. He felt reasonably certain that he could have gotten it up to please her adequately, even quite well, in fact. But it wasn't an ordinary date, and unless she really got off on sending mixed signals, she wasn't particularly willing, despite the fact that she'd come here wearing this ensemble under her dress. And if he were being perfectly honest with himself, his reasons for not wanting this went deeper than just a lack of attraction for the half-naked blonde. There was a sickening feeling in the pit of his stomach that he did not wish to examine very closely at the moment. But Tori was in a fragile state, both emotionally and physically. Draco tried again. "It's not that I don't wish to have sex with you, Tori. You're a perfectly beautiful woman. Anyone with eyes can see that. But if we're trying to court each other, trying to discuss the idea of marriage. I don't think jumping into bed together is the answer. And, truthfully, the tears just don't do it for me." She snorted a small laugh as she cried, gasping in surprise at his frankness. "I'm sorry, Draco. I didn't mean to make this so awkward." Well, it's not a big deal. We can just start over if you'd like. My elf made raspberry sorbet for dessert, if—" She took a deep breath and smiled. "That sounds lovely. Thanks." A few minutes later, Tori rejoined him, fully dressed once more, an embarrassed tinge pinking her cheeks. Over silver cups of sorbet, garnished with mint and fresh berries, Draco decided to dive in. "So, Tori, can I ask you, are you in a rush for an engagement?" The witch swallowed a still frozen bite, wincing as it went down. I'm open to a quick engagement, yes." She toyed with the spoon handle, spinning it so that it clinked against the glass a couple of times before she stopped in awkward embarrassment. "Good. That's good," Draco said, unsure of what else to say. Something inside his mind that sounded a lot like his mother urged him to go ahead and ask her for her hand. They'd work out the details of permissions and contracts later. He knew her father, Forbes Greengrass, had passed away years ago. In any case, the only one he would need to ask permission from was the Greengrass widow, Esther, and he was sure the woman would be delighted for her daughter to make such an advantageous match. Still, was he settling too soon? Draco watched the witch from across the small dining-room table. Yes, Astoria was beautiful, pure-blooded, and could carry on a decent conversation. But was that all there was? After all, there were still a dozen witches in Narcissa's box. What if there was a witch who was perfect for him, only he'd gone with the good enough option? What if there was a witch who felt like a missing puzzle piece in his life? A witch who challenged him and excited him with her intelligence and vivaciousness? A witch who completed him, who made him a better person? Perhaps there was a witch who would grow to care for him, not because he was a rich, advantageous, pure-blooded match, but because she actually liked him. She might anticipate his needs and wants, and he would look forward to doing the same for her. What if there was a witch like Granger out there for him? It was a ridiculous idea, of course. In his lifetime, Draco had looked at thousands of women, met hundreds of witches, bedded dozens of them. There was no witch out there like Hermione Granger. This thought settled in his brain like a lead anvil. "Plans for the weekend," Tori was saying. Pardon, what was that?" Draco had been staring at her as he wool-gathered. Now he shook his head, struggling to refocus on the woman opposite the dining-room table from him, and not the one that constantly lingered in his mind. "I was just asking if you had plans for the weekend," she repeated. He began evasively. He had nothing lined up yet, but he fully expected to pull another lucky name from Narcissa's treasure box, and set up another date with another lunatic, lucky lady. Tori held up her hand in reassurance. "I wasn't asking for another date, Draco. Believe me, I completely understand how this goes. The older I get, the more my mother reminds me that the pool of eligible men is drying up, and all the while the other women are getting younger. I realize you've got your pick of witches, and I don't wish to monopolize your time." He sighed, licking his spoon clean contemplatively. "It's difficult, you know. I know it's imperative that I get married, but it doesn't make this process any easier, having that decision hanging over my head." The witch nodded with a relieved smile. "Don't feel like you need to rush your decision on my part." He returned her smile, but only nodded. 30 minutes later, The flue darkened from green to black once more as Tori departed. Pym gathered the dessert dishes and extinguished the candles slowly, giving Draco a chance to talk. When he did not, Pym took the initiative. "Did Master make a love connection tonight?" Draco inhaled slowly, the image flitting into his mind of the stick-straight stiff Astoria, lying on his bed, waiting for him with what almost felt like dread. "Not especially, Pym," he answered. The elf nodded. "Perhaps next time?" "Perhaps," Draco said. In his mind, the vision of Astoria had been replaced by one of Granger in his bed, waiting for him. He closed his eyes to drive out the image, ignoring the low excitement in his belly at the folly of the very idea. "Good night, Pym." Trudging down the corridor to his bedroom, he undressed and flopped onto the bed, slightly defeated. He was immediately enveloped in a sickly, sweet vanilla musk scent, so cloying and foreign that no freshening charm would touch it. It was a perfectly acceptable fragrance, he knew, but something about it seemed off somehow. Sitting up in mild annoyance, he marched to the spare bedroom down the hall, stretching out on the black and gold brocade spread. Pym would need to replace the sheets tomorrow. As he closed his eyes, he tried, and failed, to replace the image of Granger in his mind. Thursday evening, 5 August, 2010. He called upon his mother at Malfoy Manor on a weekday evening, something nearly unheard of in the last several years. The elves seemed beside themselves, whispering together before one of them popped away with a little bow towards him. Narcissa was pink-cheeked when she finally appeared behind him in the flue grate 5 minutes later. She was wearing a flowing blue and white embroidered caftan, loosely tied at the waist. "Draco! Love, it's wonderful to see you again so soon. You should have called ahead. We could have—" With these words she touched her hair, which looked particularly windswept. "It's all right, Mum," Draco said, mystified by her appearance. "Where are you coming from?" Your father thought it would be nice to—" At this, the flue sprang to life once more, and his father stepped through, wearing only a thin Turkish towel around his waist. His blonde hair tousled, and his broad shoulders bright red. "Sissa, where did you go? You went back to the house for the suntan oil, and you never came back. Oh." Lucius caught sight of his son, standing to one side of the grate, staring at him in befuddlement. "Draco. Hello, son." "Father," Draco croaked. "Where were you?" Just on a little beach holiday. The summer home, down in Crete, you know. We used to visit there when you were a child." "Where is your swimming costume?" Draco asked in alarm. Well, it's a clothing-optional beach," Lucius said in his defense. "Lucius!" Narcissa admonished. "Don't Lucius me. The boy's 30 years old. I'm certain he knows that we take off our clothes and make love to each other occasionally." His father grumbled, tugging the towel tighter around his waist. This had the unfortunate side effect of outlining his cock, something that Draco heartily wished to unsee. A part of him wanted to tell his father that he did not know that. The rest of him was simply unable to speak, for fear of dry heaving. "Lucius, go back and hold our spot on the beach, darling. Draco and I will only be a minute." His mother's caftan had fallen off her shoulder, and she hurriedly snatched it back up again around her neck. "What can I help you with, Draco?" Lucius went back to the flue, grumbling about suntan oil. Draco barely wished to meet his mother's eye. "I came to inquire about the names in that box. Find out if there are others I should meet." Narcissa's eyes flew wide. "Of course, darling. Miffy shall fetch it." A small pop near Draco's knees indicated the elf's arrival, and looking down he saw the vaunted box being held towards him. "Thank you, Miffy," he intoned, pleased to see that she, at least, was wearing decent clothing. The elf was garbed in a pink dress that would have fit a very short toddler or a very fat corgi. Then his mind snagged on this fact as he stared at the elf. Since when did Malfoy elves wear clothes? Every Malfoy elf was free, of course, even before the official resolution requiring this had been passed. In a show of good faith and progressive thinking, the Malfoys had taken the initiative to free their elves. The majority of the elves protested this fact heartily, refusing to wear clothes, even though they were at perfect liberty to do so. As soon as the tiny elf popped away, he asked his mother, "Miffy wears clothes now?" Narcissa sighed a sigh of the greatly put upon. "Not every day, but I had my book club over for luncheon earlier, and I didn't want to look like some sort of bumpkin slave driver, so I make her wear them on the days when we have company." He had to laugh at the irony of his mother ordering their elves to wear clothes. She gave him a look, so he explained. "You see why that's funny, don't you?" "Draco, we're trying to keep up with the times, darling. Don't you know how entirely out of fashion it is to be perceived as not accommodating your elves? Please, tell me you're requiring Pym to wear clothes." "Pym wears clothes, mother," he answered with a roll of his eyes. He no longer had to ask it of the elf. It had taken some convincing, of course, but Pym had come to enjoy a good accessory now and again. When Draco left for work that morning, for example, Pym had paired his navy blue trousers and miniature white Oxford shirt with a green bow tie and a pair of tiny green suspenders that just matched his bright green eyes. "Good! Well, take a look in the box. I'll warn you, I looked through it myself after you left the other day, and had to withdraw a few more names from contention. The Caldwells relocated to South Africa with their triplet daughters before the war, and they've refused to return to England, which is just as well. They all looked exactly like their father, Wilson, and he was a frightful-looking man. And somehow Davinia Macmillan stuck her son's name in there. Apparently he goes both ways, and she wanted to keep all of her options open." He held the box at arm's length, now even more concerned about its contents. "It's all right, darling. There are still 8 lovely witches here. I'm sure you can find a suitable wife from them," Narcissa trilled. The fireplace glowed green, and his father's bright blonde hair poked through. His face was glowing from the beginnings of a sunburn. "Are you done? It's nearly sunset, Sissa." Yes, Lucius. Now, Draco, just take the box with you. That'll be easier, won't it?" With hardly a backwards glance, his mother stepped into the flue, calling out the address for the summer home in Greece. After a few seconds alone in the flue parlour, Draco followed her through the grate, reciting the address for his own flat in London. Ignoring the grey evening drizzle outside the large picture windows, Draco settled on the sofa with the box, summoning a low ball of whiskey, neat. The number of cards inside had indeed dwindled to 8. He discarded Pansy Parkinson's card immediately. The witch was not now, and never really had been his type, despite the fact that they dated for most of 5th year at Hogwarts. Pansy was a good friend, but that's all she would ever really be for Draco. Even in 5th year, he had been just as happy to sit around and chinwag with her as he had been to bring her up to his dormitory to fool around. The card for Genevieve Everly followed Pansy's. Genevieve worked for the Department of the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, and had been very much against an elf wage system. He'd made the mistake of going on a single date with Genevieve months ago, and as a result had been subjected to a lengthy rant from Granger against the witch. Making a second date with Genevieve would mean instant hatred from Hermione. He was just keeping the peace in the Auror bullpen, he reasoned. With 6 remaining names, he summoned his owl and began penning letters. He would need to make this decision soon, he determined. Weasley's internal monologue was growing more obscene by the day. Only that very day, the ginger had been imagining Granger, Jesselyn from Archives, and Robard's secretary, Marielle, all kneeling in front of him, fighting each other to suck his dick. It shredded Draco's nerves to be forced to watch this lewd, imaginary display. It was only made worse, knowing that he'd engaged in this very real act during a foursome with 3 women on his birthday, mere weeks before. Now, the idea of doing the same, particularly with Granger, made him almost queasy. Friday, 6 August 2010. Susan Bones agreed to meet him for drinks after work at the Leaky. It just so happened that the rest of the Auror bullpen was headed that way as well, much to Draco's chagrin. He was already there when Granger arrived with Ginny Potter. His eyes were immediately arrested by the sight of the curly-haired witch as she removed the boxy black jacket she'd worn all day, to reveal a strapless fuchsia blouse underneath. This heavenly vision was immediately ruined by Weasley's fantasy of lowering Granger's bodice and suckling at her tits. He pointedly ignored the fact that his own mind had been constructing a similar fantasy before the weasels so rudely butted in. The door to the pub opened once more, admitting Susan. He imagined that he could feel Granger's eyes on him as he greeted the chestnut-blonde witch. He'd known Susan in their youth, and she had grown into a good-looking woman he was pleased to see. He wasn't alone in this thought. From across the room, Weasley's thoughts flipped from Granger to Susan with something akin to whiplash. They were broadcast into Draco's mind as though the man had used a sonorous charm.
"Look at the massive rack on Susan! Godric's ass! Her melons are bigger than my head! Bet I could take a nap on those titties!"
Susan, it's rather crowded in here. I didn't expect the entire bullpen to tag along when I mentioned I was going to the Leaky. Care to get out of here?" Draco was certain he could not listen to Weasley's shouted thoughts about his date's breasts all night.
"Massive gazoombas! Dear God! She might smother that mousy fucker Malfoy!"
He gritted his teeth so hard that he missed her reply entirely. Sorry, what?" he asked. "I said, that's all right. It'll be nice to catch up with a few of the others as well. Buy me a drink." Draco forced a smile. "Absolutely. What do you have?" he asked. "I'll take a scotch, neat. Make it a double. And tell the bartender to send over another in about 5 minutes," Susan said breezily. He struggled to maintain control of his eyebrows. Sure, that'll be brilliant."
"With a set of knockers like that, she could smother me any day of the week!"
"Weasley!" Draco could take it no longer. His eyes flashed further down the table at the man, trying to control his agitation. "What do you want, tosser?" Weasley asked, finally dragging his eyes away from Susan. "Lavender planning to join us?" he asked conversationally. The weasel looked contrite. Probably not." Draco tisked in mock despair. "Such a shame. I was hoping to hear her take on your novel." The ginger's face flamed a horrid shade of vermilion as he turned away, pretending to answer a question asked of him by Dawlish. The gambit worked, however. What followed was a general low hubbub of Weasley's mundane thoughts, and none of them involved Susan's oversized tits. 45 minutes on, Susan was working on her 7th double, and it was finally beginning to affect her. Her volume rose ever so slightly, and her eyes took on a slightly glassy appearance as she talked animatedly with the crowd at their end of the table. Draco wondered exactly how much the witch drank each night to have this kind of alcohol tolerance. All evening he'd been looking up, trying in vain to catch Granger's eye at the other end of the table. She seemed far too busy flirting with Andrew Waverley to notice him, however. Waverley was a curse-breaker at Gringotts, and had been a Ravenclaw prefect their first year at Hogwarts, and as far as Draco was concerned, he was a right git. He had rugged good looks, if a witch were into that sort of thing. And if Granger's reactions to their conversation were anything to go by, he was incredibly witty. By 8 o'clock, Draco hated him even more than Weasley apparently did, which was really saying something, considering the running tirade of vitriol being directed towards Waverley from the ginger. Draco had long since given up matching Susan's drink orders, and had stopped after 4 drinks. Still, his vision occasionally doubled after a long blink. The conversation continued around him, with Susan catching up with old friends. He found his mind wandering, dwelling on the curly-haired witch at the other end of the table. When he opened his eyes, he found that his stare was trained on her. A voice from his right said, "I haven't seen Hermione since I started writing for Wandering Wizard. How's it been working with her?" Draco turned slowly to look at the speaker, finding Susan sitting next to him. Bloody hell, he was meant to be on a date. He'd nearly forgotten. "Honestly, it's been great," he slurred, slowing his speech in an effort to sound out his words carefully. "She's so smart, of course. Her brain just works differently. Puts things together so easily, you know. And she's funny. Very witty, I mean. She was that way back in school as well, but now—" Their end of the table had fallen silent. Potter, Davies, Bell, and Guillory all stared at him as though he'd grown a second head. "Well, that's great to hear, then," Susan summed up lamely. "You know, I think I'm going to go. Draco, can you order me one more?" "I'll walk you out." The blonde wizard kept the thought that perhaps another drink wasn't the best idea to himself, instead signalling Keith at the bar. The barman's eyes widened slightly, even as he nodded. "Actually, I'm going to go down and talk with Hermione before I go," Susan said suddenly, tipping sideways to find her feet. Draco put out a hand to steady her. "I'll come with," he offered smoothly, listing a bit to the side himself as he stood. Susan gave him a lopsided smile, but said nothing. The witch's 8th drink met the two of them as they approached Granger and Waverley. Draco was pleased to see Waverley's eyes nearly pop out of his head as Susan's breasts moved closer. His joy, however, was tempered by a fresh chorus of inner thoughts from Weasley on the same subject. 2 subjects. Granger, being the ever-observant swot that she was, did not miss the Cursebreaker's expression change when Susan approached. She said nothing, though, greeting the other witch as the old friend that she was. The two women began chatting, leaving Draco to make awkward conversation with Waverley. "How goes it, Malfoy?" Waverley asked, his eyes still glancing occasionally at Susan's chest. "It goes great," Draco intoned, already regretting the earlier drinks. Salazar's sack. He was a grown man of 30. What was he doing? Drinking like a 22-year-old. Say, Hermione seems nice. I mean, no one measures up to... Waverley jerked his head vaguely in Susan's direction. "But she's got a pretty face and a nice body. You work with her. What do you think my chances are?" Draco adopted the sad, sober look of a man about to deliver very bad news. "Well, sure, she's nice to look at, but only if you can get past the smell." The former Ravenclaw's eyes widened. "Smell?" "The old girl has horrible flatulence, you see. She tries to blame it on others and spell away the sound, but get her alone, and it's nothing except silent but deadly ass-rippers." Waverley looked alarmed. "Really?" Draco nodded morosely. "It's true. I've encouraged her to speak to a healer, but she can't be talked to about it. I think she thinks it's cute. She calls them her bottom burps. Foul, noxious things, though, really." "Merlin, I had no idea." The other wizard looked horrified. Draco nodded. "Well, consider yourself forewarned." "Walk me out, Draco." Susan stumbled a little towards him, and Waverley's eyes lingered once again on the woman's breasts, before coming up to meet her eyes. "Lovely meeting you, Anna," the man said to her, pulling her into a hug before offering a milquetoast handshake to Draco. Susan only smiled faintly and rolled her eyes in Waverley's direction, before moving at a glacially slow pace towards the door. Once the pair of them had found the pavement out front, Draco took Susan's hand and, threaded it through the crook of his elbow. This was, in part, to be polite. But as Susan had begun to weave slightly, he also felt it was rather necessary to keep her upright. His own unsteadiness found her presence at his side helpful as well. From a pocket of her robes, the witch produced a silver flask. She magicked off the cap and took a long swig, before offering it to Draco, who refused it politely. She was unoffended, tipping it back over her own mouth to finish half the flask in one go.
"So, how long have you had a crush on Hermione Granger?"
Susan asked, apparently too drunk to mince words. Draco stumbled. "I do not—" She laughed.
"Draco, not to sound base, but every wizard's eyes in that pub were glued to my chest, all except one, my dates."
An embarrassed heat coloured his cheeks. "Susan, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." Another laugh.
"Draco, I'm dragging around a 34HH chest. Even with a featherlight charm, I can promise you I'm always a little uncomfortable."
He chuckled in spite of himself. "Still, I didn't intend to spend the entire night focusing on Granger."
"Forgive my stupidity, but why have you not asked her out?"
the witch asked. Draco pursed his lips. "Susan, how old are you?" She raised one brow at him.
"Why do you ask?"
"Just curious." He lied easily.
29. I turned 30 in February. Why, does that automatically put me out of the running for Madame Malfoy?"
Susan sneered drunkenly, even as her eyes danced in humour. "Of course not," Draco assured her, leaving off the fact that her apparent drinking problem had pretty much nipped that idea in the bud already. "I only wondered, do you feel much pressure to marry? We're both getting of an age, you know." Susan giggled.
"You sound like my mother."
Rolling his eyes, he joined in her laughter. "I imagine I do. Bloody hell, I sound like mine as well."
"I just don't see the need to rush, you know? I mean, witches and wizards live until well past 100 years old, typically. Witches don't go through the change until their 70s. Why would I wish to tie myself to one man before I'm 50?
"Talk to me again in February. I imagine your tune will change," Draco mumbled.
"Speak up, I can't hear you,"
Susan hiccuped. "It was nothing. Susan, I truly apologize for wasting your time."
"Don't worry about it, Draco. I had a fun evening with friends, and an attractive man bought me drinks. I've got no complaints," she said, giving him a lazy smile. "Besides, that Andrew bloke sent me his flu address."
"He what?" Draco asked, his outrage amplified by his inebriation. Susan rolled her eyes, even as she laughed.
"You realize that with these things I typically get 2 or 3 notes like that a night?" she asked, gesturing to her chest.
He shook his head. "Sorry, I wasn't aware."
"But you didn't answer my question. Are you not asking Hermione out because of some pure-blooded cock-and-bull nonsense? Or are you really that slow on the uptake that you didn't realize you had a thing for her?"
Draco gave her a drunken smirk. "Who says it's not both?"
Susan wrinkled her nose at him. "Really? I must admit I thought better of you, Malfoy. I thought all that pure-blood nonsense was in your past. I suppose I was wrong."
He looked down uncomfortably. "It's not that. The pure-blood bit, I mean. At least, not in the sense you're thinking." She grinned ruefully.
"I take it your mother is pushing for a pure-blood match, then?"
"Something like that," he agreed, knowing the curse wouldn't abate unless he married a pure-blood. After all, Millie was with a muggle and still heard the voice in her head. Draco was a strong wizard, and had endured plenty of difficult and harrowing times in his life, but listening to the inner ramblings of Ronald Bilious Weasley for the rest of his days was a special form of torture that he could not force himself to endure. So, a pure-blood his wife must be. They walked in silence for several seconds, each focusing on their own thoughts.
The idea of 5 more of these dates was daunting at best. Witch number 4 had been a bust, and he was ready to go home. Susan, can I walk you home?" "Don't worry about seeing me all the way to mine." She brushed off his words easily, with a smile. "Believe me, my wards are strong. Otherwise I'd be flu-calling your department once a week to report some Lothario who couldn't take no for an answer." He frowned. "If you're sure." Susan nodded. "I'm going to have another drink, and then see if Andrew Waverley has made it home yet. Although he looked like he was thinking about going home with Hermione," she mused to herself. He might have changed his mind," Draco said evasively, snapping his lips together to keep his smile inside. He failed miserably, snorting in quiet laughter. "What did you tell him?" The witch cocked a drunken eyebrow at him. His smile grew wider. "I might have made something up about her being full of hot air. I said she breaks wind a lot." She giggled. "You always were an asshole. Well, if you're going to box that fellow out, you should be prepared to stand in his place." "What do you
"Call her, idiot!" Susan laughed, leaning forward with her hands on his shoulders to rise to her tiptoes and kiss his cheek. "Good night."
"Good night, Susan. And thanks," he said, even as Susan's surprisingly deft spin swept her away in a twist of disapparition. He waited only a moment before following suit, appearing back inside the living room of his own flat. He botched the landing, taking the coffee table hard with his knee and stumbling across the Persian rug to plant his face upon it. Salazar's tits. How had the witch, half his size, drunk twice the amount he had, and still managed such a smooth apparition? Had Draco drank the same, Pym would have been scooping up his splinched torso and legs to haul to St. Mungo's. After a few moments of trying and failing to push himself back upright, he flopped to the rug once more. This was just as good a place as any to rest, he reasoned. "Malfoy!" A beautifully familiar voice called out to him from a spot near his head. "Ugh!" he groaned, barely stirring. He could feel the soft silken fibres of the handmade rug against his cheek, and he stirred slightly, finding a cooler spot against which to rest. "Malfoy! Draco, get up! Don't make me come through this flu to help you!" the voice called, slightly more annoyed now. With a great measure of difficulty, he pushed himself up into a passable plank, before rolling onto his back with a massive sigh. "Who's that?" he asked, struggling to keep his head from rolling off his shoulders. He did so, but only just. The room continued to spin without him joining in, causing his stomach to lurch. "Stop faffing about and talk to me, Pratt! What did you say to Andrew to make him scarper like that?" He opened his eyes, turning his head to see the hard, copper-bright stare of Granger, hovering above his grate. The green flames licked at her chocolatey curls, and now that he found this vision, he would have struggled to look away if he'd tried. Salazar, she was so fucking beautiful, his scotch-soaked mind said. "Thanks, Malfoy. You're quite fit as well. Now, tell me what you said to Andrew." "Who?" he asked, sounding rather like a hoot owl, the way he drew out the syllable. Did you really tell him I had a tooting problem?" He grinned. "Which? You've got a titting problem. Those tits are fabulous. They're always on my mind." He slurred, even as his brain tried in vain to make his mouth shut up. "You are such a knob! Is that what you told Susan tonight, as well?" Granger asked, narrowing her eyes at him. "Yeah, hers were kind of fabulous too, but yours are perfect, love. Believe me, everyone thinks so, I know for a fact." "Going around having discussions about my tatas, are you, Malfoy?
Here I was, feeling bad for tipping the bartender to send you triples all night. Sounds like you deserve the state you're in.
Fuck. Is that why I feel like I've been hit by a lorry, Granger?
He spat out, almost literally, as his mouth felt as though it were filling with sawdust as he spoke. Perhaps, she said, with a little smile.
I'm sorry. Can I make it up to you?
He forced his limbs to move, trying to stand in his contrition. The coffee table would not stay still long enough for him to push himself up, however. In your current state, I highly doubt that you could make anything get up, if you catch my drift. The witch giggled. She was right, of course. Even a magic wand wasn't able to overcome a serious case of whiskey dick.
Are you sure? My mouth still works,
he offered hopefully. Does it, though? You sound like you're chewing marbles, she pointed out.
Oh.
His distress must have been evident on his face, because her expression softened. Listen, let me call your elf. Pym. There was a pop near his head. Be a love, Pymmy, and get this tosser into his bed, please.
Yes, Miss Granger.
Draco's eyes closed of their own accord, and a second later his cheek rested on the cool fluffiness of white Egyptian cotton.
No, Granger. Stay with me. I need you. Tell me what you said about me at Christmas.
Through the slits of his eyes, however, he saw that he was lying in his bed, alone with his elf, who was carefully removing his dragon-hide boots.
Master did not make a love connection tonight?
The elf asked sorrowfully. Draco did not answer. If anything, he worried that he'd done more damage than good this evening. Still, unless his mind was deceiving him, Granger had called him quite fit, after he apparently told her that she was beautiful. Perhaps the night hadn't been a complete waste, he thought, as he drifted into sleep, to thoughts of the witch within his flue. In this version of reality, Granger didn't seem to mind his hands and his mouth on her perfect tits, and everywhere else. In his dreams, he held her with as close a thing to love as he knew. Granger's sensual kisses nearly drove him wild with want for her, and as the moments played out in his whiskey-soaked mind, she called him Draco as he made love to her. Thank you for listening to Proximity by Great78. If you enjoyed this story and would like to listen to more, please subscribe to my podcast, Silver and Copper, on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find a link for this story in the show description or search Archive of Our Own for Great78.